The book of Numbers contains some of the most shocking examples of human rebellion in the entire Bible. But here's what most people completely miss. This isn't just a collection of random wilderness stories. It's actually God's masterclass on faith versus unbelief. And the pattern of rebellion it reveals is still destroying lives today. By the end of this video, you'll understand the four-stage cycle of spiritual failure that keeps people wandering in circles. And you'll see how to break free from it once and for all. I'm going to take you through the entire book of Numbers in just minutes. But instead of boring you with census data and travel logs, I'm going to show you the hidden patterns of rebellion, the shocking consequences of unbelief that will make you rethink everything, and how this ancient book reveals why most people never reach their God-given potential. We'll cover 10 major events, and I guarantee you'll never see faith, complaining, or spiritual leadership the same way again. Let me start with something that will completely blow your mind about how God prepares people for their destiny. It's been 1 year since the Israelites left Egypt. They're camped at Mount Sinai, and God tells Moses to count all the men 20 years and older who can go to war. The total, 3,550 fighting men plus women and children, probably over 2 million people total. But this isn't just about military strategy. God is organizing his people for conquest. He arranges the 12 tribes in a specific formation around the tabernacle, 3 tribes on each side, with the Levites in the center caring for God's presence. When they march, it's not chaos. It's a coordinated movement with the Ark of the Covenant leading the way. God's presence goes before them into battle. Here's what's incredible. God has just spent a year teaching them his laws, his worship, his character. They've seen his power in the plagues, the Red Sea, Mount Sinai. They have everything they need to succeed. This is stage 1 of God's preparation process. He equips his people with everything they need before he sends them into battle. But having the right equipment doesn't guarantee victory. What happens next reveals something shocking about how quickly people can go from worship to rebellion. The Israelites finally leave Mount Sinai and begin their journey to the Promised Land. But within 3 days, they start complaining about their hardships. God's anger burns against them, and fire breaks out in the camp, consuming some of the people on the outskirts. Moses intercedes and the fire stops, but they name the place Taberah, burning. But that's just the beginning. Soon, they're complaining about the food. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt, the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we have nothing but this manna. Think about this. They're complaining about miraculous bread from heaven because they miss the food they ate as slaves. They're romanticizing their bondage because freedom requires faith. Moses becomes so frustrated, he tells God, "I can't carry all these people by myself. If this is how you're going to treat me, just kill me now." God's response is interesting. He takes some of the spirit that's on Moses and puts it on 70 elders to help him lead. But he also sends quail, so much quail that it's piled 3 feet high around the camp. But while the meat is still in their teeth, God strikes them with a severe plague. They name the place Kibroth Hattaavah, graves of craving, because they buried the people who craved other food. This is stage 2 of the spiritual failure cycle, complaining. Instead of trusting God's provision, people focus on what they don't have and romanticize their past bondage. But the worst rebellion is yet to come. What happens next is one of the most tragic what-if moments in all of human history. The Israelites reach the border of the Promised Land. Moses sends 12 spies, 1 from each tribe, to scout out the land for 40 days. When they return, all 12 agree on the facts. The land is incredibly fertile, flowing with milk and honey. They bring back grapes so large it takes 2 men to carry 1 cluster. But 10 of the spies focus on the obstacles. The people are strong, The cities are fortified, and we saw the descendants of Anak there, giants. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. Only 2 spies, Joshua and Caleb, focus on God's promise. The land is exceedingly good. If the Lord delights in us, He will bring us into this land and give it to us. Don't rebel against the Lord, and don't fear the people of the land. They are bread for us. Their protection has departed from them, but the Lord is with us. But the people believe the majority report. They weep all night and say, "If only we had died in Egypt. Let's choose a leader and go back." They're literally at the border of their destiny, and they want to return to slavery because they're afraid of giants. Joshua and Caleb tear their clothes and plead with the people, but the congregation talks about stoning them. That's when God's glory appears in the tabernacle. God tells Moses, "How long will these people despise me? How long will they not believe in me, despite all the signs I've performed among them? I'll strike them with pestilence and disinherit them." This is stage 3 of the spiritual failure cycle, unbelief. When faced with God's promises versus visible obstacles, people choose to believe what they see rather than what God has said. But Moses does something incredible. What Moses does next reveals the heart of true spiritual leadership and changes God's mind. Moses intercedes for the people with one of the most powerful prayers in the Bible. He doesn't argue that they deserve mercy. He appeals to God's reputation among the nations. "If you kill these people, the Egyptians will hear about it and tell the inhabitants of this land. They know you brought these people out of Egypt by your power. If you destroy them, the nations will say, 'The Lord wasn't able to bring them into the land He promised, so He killed them in the wilderness.'" Then Moses quotes God's own words back to him. "The Lord is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, forgiving iniquity and transgression." God responds, "I have pardoned them according to your word." But then comes the devastating consequence. "As surely as I live, and as surely as the glory of the Lord fills the whole earth, none of these men who saw my glory and the signs I performed in Egypt and the wilderness, but have tested me 10 times, and have not obeyed, my voice shall see the land I swore to give their fathers." Everyone 20 years and older, except Joshua and Caleb, will die in the wilderness. Their children will enter the promised land, but this generation will wander for 40 years until they're all dead. The 10 spies who brought the bad report die immediately of a plague, but Joshua and Caleb, who believed God's promise, will live to see the land. This is stage 4 of the spiritual failure cycle. Consequences. Unbelief doesn't just delay your destiny, it can cost you your destiny entirely. But the people's rebellion is far from over. What happens next shows how rebellion spreads and why spiritual authority matters. A Levite named Korah, along with Dathan, Abiram, and 250 prominent leaders, rebels against Moses and Aaron's authority. They say, "You've gone too far. The whole community is holy, and the Lord is among them. Why do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly?" This sounds spiritual, but it's actually pride disguised as equality. They're not content with their God-given roles. They want Moses and Aaron's positions. Moses falls on his face and tells them, "Tomorrow the Lord will show who belongs to him and who is holy." He tells Korah and his followers to bring censers with incense, and God will choose who can serve as priests. The next day, Korah gathers the whole assembly against Moses and Aaron. God's glory appears, and he tells Moses and Aaron, "Separate yourselves from this assembly so I can consume them instantly." But Moses and Aaron fall on their faces and intercede. "O God of the spirits of all flesh, when one man sins, will you be angry with the entire assembly?" God tells everyone to move away from Korah, Dathan, and Abiram's tents. Then Moses makes a bold declaration. If these men die naturally, then the Lord hasn't sent me. But if the Lord creates something new, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them alive, then you'll know these men have despised the Lord. As soon as he finishes speaking, the ground splits open and swallows Korah, Dathan, Abiram, their families, and all their possessions alive. Fire comes from the Lord and consumes the 250 men offering incense. But incredibly, the very next day, the people complain against Moses and Aaron. You've killed the Lord's people. God's anger burns, and a plague breaks out. Aaron runs into the crowd with his censer, standing between the living and the dead, and the plague stops. But 14,700 people die. This shows how rebellion is contagious and how people will blame leaders for the consequences of their own choices. What God does next settles the question of spiritual authority once and for all. God tells Moses to collect a staff from each tribal leader and write their names on them. Aaron's name goes on the Levite staff. All 12 staffs are placed in the tabernacle overnight. The next morning, Aaron's staff has not only budded, it has blossomed and produced ripe almonds. It's the only staff that shows life. God says, "Put Aaron's staff back before the testimony as a sign for the rebels, so you may put an end to their complaints against me, or they will die." This dead piece of wood coming to life is a picture of resurrection, showing that God's chosen leaders have his life and authority, not because they're better people, but because God has chosen them. But the people's fear of God's holiness goes too far in the other direction. We're going to die. Anyone who even comes near the tabernacle will die. This shows how people swing from rebellion to paralyzing fear instead of finding the balance of reverent faith. What happens next reveals something beautiful about God's provision, even in the midst of judgment. Even though the people are under God's judgment, wandering in the wilderness, God continues to provide for them. Their clothes don't wear out, their feet don't swell, the manna continues to fall, but they're still not satisfied. At a place called Meribah, they quarrel with Moses because there's no water. "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to this terrible place with no grain, figs, vines, or pomegranates, and there's no water to drink?" God tells Moses, "Take your staff and speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield water." But Moses is so frustrated with the people's constant complaining that instead of speaking to the rock, he strikes it twice with his staff and says, "Listen, you rebels. Must we bring water out of this rock for you?" Water gushes out, and the people and animals drink. But God tells Moses and Aaron, "Because you didn't trust me enough to honor me as holy before the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I'm giving them." This seems harsh, but Moses represented God to the people. When he acted in anger instead of following God's instructions exactly, he misrepresented God's character. The rock was supposed to be struck once, which happened earlier, and then spoken to, representing how Christ was struck once for our sins, and now we speak to him for provision. Moses' one moment of anger cost him his dream of entering the promised land. This shows how leadership carries greater responsibility and consequences. What happens next shows how past victories can become present obstacles. As the Israelites journey around Edom, they become impatient and speak against God and Moses. "Why have you brought us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? There's no bread, no water, and we detest this miserable food." So God sends venomous snakes among the people. Many are bitten and die. The people come to Moses and say, "We've sinned by speaking against the Lord and you. Pray that the Lord will take the snakes away." Moses prays, and God tells him, "Make a bronze snake and put it on a pole. Anyone who is bitten can look at it and live." Moses makes a bronze snake and puts it on a pole. Everyone who looks at it after being bitten lives, this seems strange. Why would God use a snake, the symbol of Satan, for healing? Because the bronze snake represents sin being judged. The people had to look in faith at the symbol of their judgment to receive healing. Jesus would later say, "Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes may have eternal life in him." The bronze snake becomes a picture of the cross, where our sin was judged so we could be healed. But here's what's tragic. Hundreds of years later, the Israelites would worship this bronze snake as an idol. King Hezekiah had to destroy it because people were burning incense to it. This shows how even God's blessings can become idols if we worship the gift instead of the giver. What happens next is one of the strangest stories in the entire Bible, but it reveals something crucial about God's sovereignty. Balak, king of Moab, sees this massive nation of Israelites camped near his territory. He's terrified, so he hires Balaam, a pagan prophet, to curse Israel. Balaam is a fascinating character. He's not an Israelite, but he has some kind of relationship with the true God. When Balak's messengers come with payment, Balaam asks God what to do. God tells him, "Don't go with them. Don't curse the people, because they are blessed." But when Balak sends more distinguished officials with promises of great honor and payment, Balaam asks God again. God says, "Go with them, but only do what I tell you." Balaam saddles his donkey and goes, but God's anger burns because his heart is set on the reward. God sends an angel to block the path, but only the donkey can see it. The donkey turns aside 3 times to avoid the angel. Each time, Balaam beats the donkey. Finally, God opens the donkey's mouth and it says, "What have I done to you that you've beaten me 3 times?" Balaam actually has a conversation with his donkey. Then God opens Balaam's eyes and he sees the angel with a drawn sword. The angel tells him he would have been killed if the donkey hadn't turned aside. Balaam meets Balak and tries 4 times to curse Israel. But every time he opens his mouth, blessings come out instead of curses. He prophesies about Israel's future glory and even about the coming Messiah. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. Balak is furious and sends Balaam away without payment. But before leaving, Balaam gives Balak deadly advice. You can't curse Israel directly, but you can get them to curse themselves through sexual immorality and idolatry. This shows that God's people are protected from external curses, but they can destroy themselves through internal compromise. What happens next is the most devastating consequence of compromise in the entire wilderness journey. Following Balaam's advice, Moabite women seduce Israelite men and invite them to sacrifice to their gods. The men eat the sacrificial food and bow down to Baal of Peor. God's anger burns against Israel, and he tells Moses, "Take all the leaders of the people and hang them in broad daylight before the Lord, so his fierce anger may turn away from Israel." Moses tells the judges, "Each of you must kill those under your jurisdiction who have joined in worshipping Baal of Peor." While Moses and the people are weeping at the entrance to the tabernacle, an Israelite man brings a Midianite woman right into the camp in full view of everyone. It's an act of brazen defiance. Phinehas, Aaron's grandson, sees this and is filled with righteous anger. He follows them into the tent and drives a spear through both of them. Immediately, the plague that had started stops. But 24,000 people die in the plague, more than died in any other single judgment in the wilderness. God commends Phinehas for his zeal. "He was zealous for my honor among the Israelites, so I didn't destroy them in my zeal. Therefore, I'm giving him my covenant of peace." This shows that compromise with sin doesn't lead to gradual decline. It leads to sudden destruction. And sometimes God raises up people with holy anger to stop the spread of corruption. Here's how the entire book of Numbers connects to your life and reveals the pattern that's still destroying people today. The 4-stage cycle of spiritual failure we see in Numbers is the same cycle that keeps people from reaching their God-given potential. Stage 1. Preparation. God equips you with everything you need: His Word, His Spirit, His promises, His people. You have all the tools for victory. Stage 2. Complaining. Instead of trusting God's provision, you focus on what you don't have and romanticize your past. You forget God's goodness and start grumbling. Stage 3. Unbelief. When faced with obstacles, you choose to believe what you see rather than what God has promised. You let fear override faith. Stage 4. Consequences. Your unbelief doesn't just delay your destiny, it can cost you your destiny entirely. You end up wandering in circles instead of moving forward. But Numbers also shows us the way out of this cycle. Moses shows us the power of intercession, standing in the gap for others even when they don't deserve it. Joshua and Caleb show us the power of faith, believing God's promises despite visible obstacles. Phinehas shows us the power of holy anger, being zealous for God's honor when others compromise. The bronze snake shows us the power of looking to God's solution instead of focusing on our problems. But here's the most incredible part. Every element of Numbers points to Jesus Christ. The census shows God knows each of His people by name, just like Jesus knows His sheep. The arrangement of the camp with God's presence in the center points to Jesus dwelling among us. The rebellion against Moses points to humanity's rejection of Jesus, God's chosen leader. The bronze snake points directly to Jesus being lifted up on the cross for our healing. Balaam's prophecy about the star and scepter points to Jesus as the coming king. The Levitical priesthood points to Jesus as our perfect high priest. Numbers isn't just about ancient history. It's about the choice every person faces. Will you trust God's promises despite visible obstacles? Or will you let unbelief keep you wandering in circles? From preparation to rebellion, from unbelief to consequences, it's all one incredible warning about the dangers of spiritual failure and the power of faith. The 4 stages: preparation, complaining, unbelief, and consequences, a cycle that's still trapping people today. But Numbers isn't just about what happened 3,500 years ago. Every day, people are standing at the border of their promised land, their God-given potential, their calling, their destiny, and every day, they're choosing between faith and fear. Are you letting fear of obstacles override faith in God's promises? Are you wandering in circles instead of moving forward? The same God who wanted to bring Israel into the promised land wants to bring you into yours. The same God who provided manna in the wilderness will provide for your needs. The same God who defeated Israel's enemies will defeat yours. But you have to choose faith over fear, gratitude over complaining, God's promises over visible obstacles. The question isn't whether God is able to bring you in. The question is whether you'll trust Him enough to move forward. Don't let the giants in your land keep you from your destiny. Don't let fear of obstacles override faith in God's promises. Choose to be like Joshua and Caleb, people who see the same obstacles as everyone else, but choose to focus on God's faithfulness instead. Your promised land is waiting. The question is, will you enter in, or will you wander in circles for another 40 years? The journey continues in the book of Deuteronomy, where Moses gives his final speeches before the people enter the promised land. If you want to see how the story concludes and discover the powerful principles for finishing strong that will transform how you approach the end of any season, click on this video where I break down the entire book of Deuteronomy. And if this video helped you see Numbers in a completely new way, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we're going through the entire Bible with this same approach.